Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my fourth and final quarterfinals overview and analysis. We have the fourth and final quarterfinal that took place, well, unfortunately not today, but yesterday. This is actually getting recorded the day after the quarterfinal. I've been having a myriad of technical issues, so I want to say thank you guys for being so patient with this video. I think it's coming out a full day late, and I really am in apologies for that. Luckily, if you're seeing this, it means it did actually get out, which is a good thing overall, I would say, with how things have gone recently for me. But, yeah, today we're here to talk about the fourth and final quarterfinal matchup between DRX and Edward Gaming. A really, really interesting matchup that I think a lot of people were excited to see. But, of course, let me know down in the comment section below if you were excited to see this matchup. And if so, who were you cheering for? Who did you expect to win? Who'd you have in your crystal ball picks? All of that down in the comment section below. You know I love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback on all of these series and on all of these players. If you want to know my in-depth thoughts and analysis on how this matchup lies, you can actually go ahead and check out my quarterfinals preview video that went up at the beginning of the quarterfinals. That's going to be up in the iCard right now. That's going to detail a position-by-position breakdown of both of these teams and how I think they fare in this matchup. So go ahead and check that out if you are interested. But with that all being said, it is time to jump into the analysis of the game. If you are not familiar with how we do things here on this channel, we're going to be going game by game, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team had in the game, talking about where they did well, where they did not do well, and perhaps where they can move in future games. So strap in. It's going to be a fun one. This was a blast of a series to watch, and I hope I can make it worthwhile to listen to as well. But let's go ahead and kick things off right now with game number one. And game number one was an EDG win. EDG kicks off the series with a pretty big W here. Very important for them. I picked EDG in this series. A little bit of a spoiler there, but I'm sure most of you at this point have watched that quarterfinal video. I did pick EDG to win this series, and they came out in game number one looking pretty much exactly how I expected them to. Draft-wise, I think they crushed it here. A lot of really interesting picks. First and foremost, making sure that Scout had something that he could be entirely proactive on, something he could win the game on. He's really been more beneficial on these late-game scaling picks. A lot of the early-game focused mid laners really haven't gone EDG's way. Now, I do like the more facilitative mids for them as well, but I'm really not super into the assassins on the side of EDG and for Scout in particular. Not that I think he plays them poorly, more so I just don't know if the team necessarily plays around him in the way that you kind of need to when you pick something like an Akali in that mid lane. So really glad to see them pick up the Azir here, which I think is absolutely massive for EDG overall. Viper gets his late game carry here on the Sivir, even with the Yuumi banned out. I actually really like this. It's something we're really not seeing from anybody else in the game right now, and that's pulling Sivir out when there's no Yuumi. We're really seeing a consistency of Yuumi Sivir as a duo, but Sivir can still do a lot even without the protection of Yuumi. You pair that up with the Soraka here, it does very similar things, keeping Sivir alive, keeping her protected in these team fights, while also actually adding a bit more early lane damage and early lane poke. It's very difficult to lane into Soraka traditionally, although DRX certainly tries to with a counter matchup here. And then, of course, you've got the Kennen and the Lee Sin on the top side. Kennen a direct counter to the Fiora, and then Lee Sin something that you can actually create early pressure on because the rest of this team is quite weak in the early game. On the side of DRX, very intriguing draft. They draft the Graves for Pioshik on B1. Don't hate this at all. Graves is an incredibly strong pick, and there's really not a lot of junglers that match his proactivity, both even in the early game, but especially in the late game. Where I think this draft starts to fall apart is pretty much everything after this. The Ashe coming in here, a little bit over-aggressive here. I think they really dominated on this in group stage and just figured they didn't have any sort of counterplay, but EDG actually just goes for this hyper-scaling late-game team-fighting-oriented bot lane, which is super in character for EDG. That's what they were super successful at last year at the World Championships, and what they kind of developed as their style over the course of the second half of the year. So the Ashe doesn't feel nearly as effective in this particular circumstance. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be good, but really the pros of Ashheimer as a duo and what we saw throughout group stage was the fact that it could really dominate that laning phase and create a lot of difficult scenarios to play against. I don't think Sivir is going to have nearly that same kind of problem. And Soraka actually deals with the Ashe and the Heimer relatively well with the silence. And so really not a ton that they can do in that lane, but, you know, theoretically there are still plays to be made. The real problems I have here are the solo laners. You go for Fiora and Orianna as your two picks here on blue side 5 and 4, or 4 and 5, I guess. And I don't think either of these work, quite frankly. Fiora is way too ambitious for this comp. You've already got way too many threats that you need to play to. You've got the Graves, and you've already got a super pushing lane in the bot that basically needs to be strong side, especially against Sivir, in order to make this work at all. So you're taking a more aggressive top side with counter picks still left up on the board. I really don't like this decision. I think the Fiora was pretty easily taken out of this game. And quite frankly, DRX have not shown a great ability to be able to play around Kingen on these split pushers. Really, I thought Kingen was unlocked over the course of the year, playing these more teamfight-oriented champs that I think he could really contribute on towards the back half of the game. Fiora is not really that for me. And then you're really going to be hard-pressed for me to find flaws in Zika, but one of his flaws is that he's just not a passive player. He's not someone who's really going to be a great secondary player on the team, non-carry. And so the Orianna pick here really surprised me. You're putting all your eggs in the Pioshik basket, which I think is super bold here on somebody who has been super up and down over the course of the year, but of course when he wins, and so you're really hoping that DRX is able to get out to a relatively good start. And this game was kind of interesting. DRX actually do have a pretty decent early game off the back of Pioshik's okay, but Kingen's doing well in the top lane. Deft and Beryl are kind of farming up. It's all fine and well in the early game. It's really these late game skirmishes that really start to devolve for DRX, and this has kind of been the problem not only for DRX, but the strength for EDG, and it's a big reason why I was worried about the series on the side of DRX. It's the fact that EDG does such a great job in the mid to late game knowing exactly where everyone on the team needs to be, where it's most advantageous, and their positioning in these late game team fights is perfect, most specifically, of course, Scout and Viper, the two main carries for the team. They were sensational towards the back half here, especially Scout. Very, very easy player of the game here on the Azir. I'm talking multiple fantastic Shuriman shuffles, 5,000 damage per fight on the Azir towards the back half. This is everything you could want out of a scaling mid laner, and then some. There really was no resistance on the side of DRX. They don't have any sort of front line, especially if Fiora is not even attempting to be there and try and flank the back line. So you really have no threat at all for Azir. He can kind of just slowly chip through the rest of the team. And that's kind of what he did. I think DRX really realized about midway through the endgame that, like, oh no, we cannot fight them in a straight 5v5. So they end up trying to go to this weird, 3-2, almost 1-3-1, but like a 3-2 kind of situation where you have Kingen and Beryl pushing a lane, and then you hope Pioshik, Zeka, and Deft can like hold off, but it's just a disaster. Not only are you not winning the 4v3, even if you send one person up there to stop the push, which it will, like Kennen by himself stops the push, or even, whatever, if you want to throw Sivir up there, obviously, but you probably don't. So Kennen by himself stops the push, right? But even outside of that, you're taking away everything Fiora wants to do up there, because not only are you taking away the split push opportunity because you're sending two people up there, therefore you're undermanned in the 4v3 in the mid lane, but you're taking away Hullbreaker on Fiora with Beryl up there. Just so many bad decisions and bad macro plays by DRX overall, and I have to say, this is one of the worst macro performances that I've seen this team make at Worlds so far. This is a team that has been really consistent over the course of the tournament at being able to maintain the state of the game, and that's something I will continue to say over the course of the series, because it's certainly not the last time we'll hear this, but they made some pretty major mistakes in this game that really separated them from EDG and really allowed them to get the upper hand towards the back half. Beryl's gonna get my dud of the game. This Heimerdinger pick really didn't work out in the way that they wanted it to. Obviously, it's not a bad pick. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, Heimer's unplayable, etc., etc. We know it can win. We know it can do well, but in this particular situation, it really didn't offer anything, and at the end of the game, he was just never where he needed to be. This Heimer really could have helped out, stopping a lot of the push that was coming from the side of EDG, but unfortunately, he was trying to shove in the top lane with the Fiora, which, like I said, just made Fiora weaker overall and really doomed everybody else on the team. And so just some bad macro decisions overall. Not a good game from Beryl. He has been prone to this, I would say, not only over the course of this tournament, but over the course of the whole year. Beryl has just been very off when it comes to being where he needs to be. That was my biggest complaint with him going into Worlds, was the fact that his biggest strength in years past on Damwon was his ability to play with his jungler in Canyon and be able to affect the map pretty much everywhere exactly where they needed him to. That is all gone this year on DRX. Him and Pioshik clearly do not have that same kind of chemistry, and so he just doesn't seem to have that same kind of macro sense. It really makes you wonder if he was kind of being pulled around a bit on Damwon, but whatever it is, this was not a good game. Deft was incredibly useless on this Ashe. Even the arrows towards the back half of the game, which are pretty much always useful, really weren't hitting any important targets. They really weren't setting up any picks. And then I can really just talk about how Zika played bad on the Orianna. This was his worst game of the tournament, in my opinion, by a considerable margin. He gets on the Orianna, a pick that I certainly would not have picked for him in game number 1, because it's, are you kidding me? Like, I don't know what the point of this is. But even then, like, still, if he can play it, he can play it, right? You're putting a lot of faith on somebody else, but if he can play it, he can play it, but he can't. Like, he could not play it at a high level. There were multiple moments where he was set up in actually a really good spot as the Orianna with ball control, maybe an ability to hit a super shockwave on multiple people, and he just wasn't willing to pull the trigger. It felt like he was incredibly passive and incredibly unsure of himself on the Orianna, so hopefully that doesn't continue. Kingen is going to get a lot of shit for this game. I do think he made some misplays. Obviously, not reposting the Azir ult is pretty tragic towards the back half of the game, but I do want to point out for all those people on Reddit that are freaking out over Kingen not doing that, no Fiora really has done that at Worlds so far. It's not a play that I would expect pros to be able to make. It's an incredibly niche, high-level play. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Even if you do it right, it's not all that predictable, and so I'm not going to blame him too much for that. I think generally speaking, he was the source of pretty much all the optimism for DRX in the back half of this game. So it's hard for me to be super mad at King into this one, but I can definitely see some of the mechanical and mental misplays that he made towards the back half of the game. Overall, definitely a game where you need to start adjusting as DRX. EDG did a great job of just surviving the early game with a comp that featured Azir and Sivir, and even the Kennen with really no strong frontline on the side of DRX. It was really easy for them to be able to snowball the game out of control. DRX has to be able to be more aggressive in the early game. This is a comp that really needs to punish EDG, and they just weren't able to do it hard enough. This Graves really wanted to get rolling. Perhaps putting Zika on somebody that can actually carry the game. Maybe taking some of the load off of Kingen and putting it towards the bot side. I do think those are two positive changes that DRX could make. On the side of EDG, however, really just kind of playing your strengths on this one, and I would suggest sticking to it. A lot of scaling, very scaling-oriented, and that's kind of EDG as a team. I think if you stick to that, you're probably going to be in a good spot. So, who is going to be able to take game number 2? Is it going to be EDG going up 2-0 and really making this a very difficult series for DRX to come back from? Or is DRX going to even things out and bring us to a traditional LCK LPL best of 3? Well, the winner of game number 2 was EDG. They are able to take game number 2, and they're able to take a commanding lead in this best of 5 series, up 2-0, and boy, are they freaking lucky. And there's nothing else to say. You can sit here and I know I'm gonna get some comments about this, and I've seen plenty on Twitter and on Reddit and everywhere else already, but yes, were there things that Deft could have optimized towards the back half of that game to maybe get one more auto attack in and do just enough damage to kill that Nexus? Yes, potentially there are, but you know what? This is luck. It was luck. I'm just gonna say it. This is the unluckiest game that I have ever seen a team play. And I'm not the luck guy. Like, luck factor doesn't really exist in League of Legends, but it certainly did here. Oh my god. For those of you who didn't watch the game, you're probably wondering what the hell I'm talking about. First of all, go watch the freaking game. Game was so good, but we'll get there. Let's talk about the game as a whole. Well, DRX actually didn't do all that great in the early game. EDG was looking pretty good for a majority of this game, and on a comp with Azir, Aphelios, and Sejuani Jax, like, that's a problem. You've got a lot of different ways to be able to win later, but DRX did invest a bit more into what I was talking about. You go, of course, for the Akali on Zika. That's always going to be a plus. It's arguably his best champion. You get the Aatrox on B1. That's always strong. It gives Kingen a weak side top laner that he can play without a ton of resources that still gives him agency. And you get Deft, arguably his best champion in the Ezreal, but also something that he can be useful on both early and later in the game, because Ezreal actually does have a pretty decent matchup into the Aphelios for my experience, and Ezreal's always going to be able to do something towards the back half of the game. It's very difficult for anybody on the side of EDG to get on him unless he gets Sejuani ulted, which I just think is going to be super, super unlucky in this game, because somebody should be in front of Deft. Also, he's good enough to just E out of the Sejuani ult. Like, I shouldn't expect him to get hit, right? And so it's going to be very difficult to actually deal with him in this game, but man, that's not what happened early. EDG actually looked great in this game. Viper dominated the early game. A very impressive performance from him on the Aphelios. Arguably his best champion. We're kind of just trading comfort picks here, but the Aphelios obviously always been a huge pick for EDG, just generally speaking. Viper plays great in this game. He paired up with the Lulu. I've been talking about how I still think this is probably the best bot lane in the game right now. I mean, Lucian Nami's really good, but this is right up there for me with Lucian Nami. Aphelios Lulu is incredibly difficult to deal with because it has such a simple, safe laning phase and is probably the most difficult to deal with in the late game of all the bot lanes. Really surprised to see DRX ban out the Kai'Sa before it bans out the Aphelios on Viper. I get it, Viper's great at both, but Aphelios, I feel like, just gives you everything that Kai'Sa gives with a bit more safety and a bit more security, a bit more understanding, and a stronger laning phase by a significant amount. If you were playing Kai'Sa into Ezreal This game was a lot harder. That's all I'll say. But yeah, EDG is able to generate a pretty decent lead in this game. Scout looks good. Flandre looks great up in the top side. Got to give him a ton of credit on the Jax. JJ actually spends a lot of time trying to make sure that Jax is in a good spot. Pioshik, on the other hand, spends a lot of time trying to make sure the Aatrox is in a good spot, which is really not how I would expect these team compositions to go. I tweeted about this on the day, but it really felt like Pioshik and Deft maybe had some sort of argument before. Obviously, this is all just a joke, but like, he never went bot lane. He didn't go bot lane the whole series, which is really weird to me considering how well Deft was playing, but it is what it is. Tried to invest a lot into the Aatrox. Didn't really work out. The Jax was able to generate pretty consistently. Luckily, you still had Zika here on the Akali, who's always going to be useful in the back half of the game, and you've got Deft on this Ezreal, who is going to hurt. Not to mention, you still have a Heimerdinger. Very weird draft pick. I really don't see Heimer working into, like, this comp, which is always just going to ignore him all game long, but Beryl picks it up anyways, and Beryl has a stinker of a game in the early game. He gets picked off over and over and over and over. I'm talking multiple times where he's just by himself trying to get vision or just overextended, and he dies, and he dies, and he dies. It's just, you can excuse some of this by saying, like, well, somebody was going to die on DRX. It just so happened to be Beryl, right? Like, he's sacked for the rest of the team, but at the end of the day, like, so a lot of these were unnecessary, and that's kind of been the MO of Beryl throughout this tournament and throughout the year so far, is just makes some good plays, but he also makes some terribly bad ones, and in this game, it really did cost them. But DRX does start to turn around a lot of these team fights. They make them a lot closer. The Aatrox is impossible to kill. Zika's doing a ton of damage. The Ezreal is starting to hurt. And the Heimer, for all his flaws, is really starting to create some problems in these team fights. And so you're actually looking at a position around Baron where EDG are forcing it, and DRX really aren't in a great spot. But the Nexus has kind of been opened up. Really, it's only the Nexus turrets that are up. Deft teleports out while EDG are doing Baron. Kingen tries to follow but gets interrupted. That definitely mattered. Deft gets into the base. He destroys the Nexus turrets. And he's one auto attack away from killing the Nexus. And the inhibitor responds. And it's like, oh my god. I think my neighbors must have called the cops on me because I screamed. I audibly screamed, like at the top of my lungs, when this happened. It was the most heartbreaking, gut-wrenching thing I have ever experienced in a game of League of Legends in my entire life. I cannot even imagine what Deft was feeling at that time on the Ezreal. He gets picked off in base, whereas everybody else died trying to stop recalls to get Deft the win. And EDG marched down and win the game. And it's like, oh god, it's just so brutal. Like, it is the most heartbreaking, destroying thing that I have ever seen, and that's League of Legends. That's what Worlds is about. So big credit to Viper. He's going to get player of the game on the Aphelios. Those ults were absolutely obliterating towards the back half of the game, and he honestly played really well. The positioning was fantastic, and you can always really expect that from him. He's one of the top 280 carries in the world for a reason. He doesn't have a single flaw in his game, in my opinion. Want to give a big shout out to Flandre here on the Jax as well. Was able to generate a consistent lead and was really genuinely a problem for DRX throughout the rest of the game. Was getting triple Jaxies off, and overall was just really, really strong. Unfortunately, not enough to be able to close the game out himself. But, you know, credit to Flandre and Viper. I think they were probably the two most impactful members of the game. But for DRX, it's soul-crushing. It's heartbreaking that they weren't able to pick this one up. But how do you even move on from this? You're down 0-2. You won this game. And the inhibitor respawned literally, it must have been less than 50 HP on the Nexus. I don't know. I'd be tilted out of my mind, but they've certainly got some moving to do. I like the idea of this draft. Drop the Heimer, maybe drop the Poppy. It's not really something that I would expect Pioshik to be super dominant on. He did play it super well in the LCK, but it's just not the meta for it anymore, and we know he has more comfort picks in his back pocket that he can pull out. I really like everything else, though. If you can get the Aatrox, frickin' play that. And Zika on Akali's great. Even Deft on Ezreal, I think, worked out. Maybe something a little bit more in the late game would be a little bit better. Ezreal's a good pick, but he's certainly not a great pick, especially with the amount of AD carries that I would consider incredibly strong right now. Ezreal's not really one of them, so maybe something that's a little bit better in that role, at least a little bit more meta, might give you more agency, but generally speaking, it's just, this game came down to a coin flip, and unfortunately for DRX, they lost. For EDG, you gotta feel great walking out of this up 2-0. You should be down 1-1, but you gotta take advantage of this. Clearly, this is a DRX team that has shown that they have the capability of beating you. You need to be able to close this series out. You're up 2-0. You'd really like to be able to close it out 3-0, but dropping a game here isn't the end of the world. You've played almost entirely to scaling up till this point. Azir, obviously Sivir in game 1, Aphelios in game 2, even the Jax in the top lane. A ton of team fight potential coming out from this team, and I really don't expect that to change. That has been EDG, and it will continue to be EDG, win or lose. So, It's win or go home now, every game from now for DRX. Are they going to be able to take game number 3, rebound from this mental disaster? Or are EDG going to show that you had your chance, you should have taken it, and closed the game out in a 3-0 sweep? Well, the winner of game number 3 was DRX. They are able to somehow calm themselves, collect their heads, and respond in game number 3 with a season-saving win. Absolutely huge from them here to win game 3. Obviously, it's only the first win. You're going to need a lot more in order to continue your World's journey. But you know what? You looked great in this game. The balls on DRX, just in general, not only to respawn in this game, but to respond with the draft that they did. How aggressive is this comp? Of course, if you're going to give Aatrox on blue side, yeah, I'm taking that, absolutely. But you know what? Pioshik hasn't gotten to play Kindred a whole ton this tournament. He loves the champion. He's named after Mark. Give him Kindred. We love that. Zika playing Silas. He doesn't lose on that pick. Let's give that him. And you know what? Let's top this all off. Let's do the creme de la creme, which is Deft on Draven. Now, historically speaking, this is not a Deft pick, but you know what scares me? A player like Deft on Draven in a win-or-go-home game. Certainly not feeling super good about that. Oh, you add Soraka into the mix? That's a little bit of a weird choice, I'm not gonna lie. That one didn't make me feel super confident, but this is a super risky aggro draft, especially for a team on the brink of elimination here at the World Championships. They pulled it off, though. They looked great in this game. EDG answers with, and you guessed it, more team fighting. Although, they swap out some of these late game AD carries that were banned off on the side of DRX, or at least the Aphelios was, with the Kalista, which I definitely think adds a different wrinkle to this. It gives you a lot more versatility, is what I'll say, in the early part of the game here, where you have the option of being able to play towards that lane. Later in the game, she's not going to be nearly as useful. She really struggles being able to stay in, especially with a Silas and a Draven on the enemy team. It's going to be very difficult for her to be in range to actively affect this game in the way that she's going to want to towards the back half. But you do still have a lot of presence. You have Fiora on the top side, which theoretically should be able to at least do fine into Aatrox and be good come late. And you've got Graves Victor, which is actually a really underratedly strong jungle mid duo. You're just going to have to win those matchups. Luckily, I think everybody kind of won in this game. It was actually kind of a passive game, I'll say, overall. Nobody was really making major mistakes towards the beginning part of the game, but what DRX was doing and what they were doing incredibly well was making sure that this Draven was in an advantageous spot. And there was a big skirmish on the bot side early in the game. It was going to be a big scrap to see who got first blood. It would be disastrous. This was around 10 minutes in the game. It would have been disastrous if Deft dies here without being able to generate his cash out, his adoration stacks, and luckily he is able to get first blood. He dies in the process, but it's fine. He doesn't lose the stacks. He gets first blood, and he gets rich. And from that point on in the game, it's Draven time, baby. This is what you want to see. Now, I was actually getting a little bit upset with Pioshik over the course of the beginning of this game, because where was Pioshik all early game with a Draven on his team? You're right, topside, all game, trying to figure out how to deal with this Fiora. And I was like, dude, you're not going to kill the Fiora. The Aatrox doesn't have nearly that much kill pressure onto her in the early game because she can just riposte his chain, and so it doesn't actually matter. And second off, even if you were to get on her and get that kill, if JJ just has some mental fortitude to go down to bot side, this is a super killable, super gankable bot lane if you set it up right. If you even bring the Victor, I mean, what is Draven Soraka going to do against a ton of CC? Draven has the knockback, but outside of that, Soraka can heal him, and that's it. She can't really keep him safe and give him protection from a lot of these spells. He's really easily diveable, so I was really surprised to see DRX leave this bot lane basically completely alone. I'm always in favor of playing towards the Draven when you have him. Luckily enough, it ended up working out, but still, very questionable decision on Pioshik's side from my perspective at the very least. Even more questionable on the side of JJ, who just didn't go bot lane. Like, he wasn't there all game, and so I didn't really understand what exactly the point of all of this was. If you pick Draven, he should be the center of the game. Luckily, he was able to get his adoration stacks, and he was able to cash out, and from that point onwards, I mean, he was literally one-shotting Mako towards the back half of this game. It was so funny, but it was disgusting to watch. He would do like 900 damage per auto attack, which is just, it's crazy to say, but it's Draven. Just Draven things, right? Deft was able to snowball the game basically out of control. They were really never in all that much danger in teamfights. You'd think maybe towards the back half of the game, if something like a Renata ult could hit, it could be a huge problem. Perhaps even a flanking Fiora, which is not something I would often suggest. but I think against DRX's composition, that can actually be really deadly. You don't really have a lot of PL presences on the side of DRX outside of perhaps Aatrox or maybe Kindred Ultimate, but those aren't really reliable forms, and so it can actually be pretty dangerous if DRX got into a spot where the Draven was under fire, under pressure, but luckily for them, his damage could really get him out of any bad scenario he was in. Mako's ultimates would come in on the Renata, and he would do a great job of being able to use Draven ultimate to buffer that. Of course, if you don't know, there are some champions that do have pretty strong animations on their ultimates. Draven, Ezreal, those two come to mind for sure for champions that if you cast their ultimate at the exact right time, it will actually buffer certain types of CC, which was huge in these teamfights. It meant Draven really never had to deal, especially in this last one, with Renata ultimate. Basically saved Aatrox from getting absolutely obliterated by his own Draven in that teamfight, and allowed them to snowball that game out of control and then end from there. Really just great mental resilience. Gotta give it to Deft. I mean, he was the one on, the Nexus last game. For him to come back, play a champion he's played 3 times, legitimately 3 times in his pro career, never won on the champion, on maybe the biggest game of his career, because not only is this, a curse for him, right, being out in the quarterfinals, but there are all these rumors that this is going to be Deft's last dance, that this is his last time at Worlds, that this is his last year as a pro, and if, for you to go out on a game of Draven that you've played 3 times, never won on, it's a bold pick here, but it ends up working out. They're able to get the Draven moving, and they're able to win the game. On the side of EDG, the only thing I really could say that they could have done differently was invest a ton into this Kalista early, but Kalista, honestly, not that champion. I really don't know why you R5 Kalista in this comp. I think maybe a late game AD carry that was up, even something like the Kai'Sa. I hate Kai'Sa as a champion, but something like the Jinx was on the table that I think is relatively okay into Draven, can just kind of sit there and be safe, especially if the enemy jungler is not really going to do much about it. And then you can just scale into that late game, maybe be a damage threat that can potentially match him, even if he does get a few kills here or there. Remember, he wasn't Giga fed until late game, and so overall, don't love the Kalista pick. That could have been different, and JJ should have definitely played towards bot lane a tad bit more, but overall, this was mostly just DRX, in my opinion, playing well, and not so much EDG playing bad. It was more so DRX just kind of got the lead that they needed to on the comp, and then from that point, it was out of control. If they don't get the lead on Draven, they probably lose this game, and that's kind of just Draven games in general. If Draven gets ahead, he wins. If Draven gets behind, he loses. He is the central focus of every single game that he is a part of at a pro level, so that was game 3, but the series is by no means over. Yes, DRX was able to win game 3, but it's not as simple as winning 1. You've got to win 2 and 3 here. You've got to win 3, 4, and 5 to be able to get out of this series alive and kicking. This was a very good rebuilder of momentum here for DRX, but EDG is not a team that is going to sit there, roll over, and die. So, is DRX going to be able to keep the momentum rolling here in game number 4, or is EDG going to say, well, it was just a little bit, it was a Draven game, we get that off our plate, and we move on, and we end the series now? Well, the winner of game number 4 was DRX. They are able to win game number 4 and tie this series up at 2 apiece. Unbelievable. We saw this yesterday here as well, with Gen G and Damwon going to a game 5 after Gen G was able to win the first 2 games. The same is happening here with DRX and EDG, and it's just even more heartbreaking when you realize that DRX should have won game 2, that this series should be over. It should be a 3-1 in favor of DRX, but here we are, sitting at 2-2. EDG better be thanking their lucky stars they have this game 5 shot. But let's go ahead and talk about what happened here in game number 4. A beautiful game, a beautiful execution from DRX. Really everything that they could have asked for in this game they got. Really interesting draft that I actually do think plays to a lot of their strengths. Pioshik on Sejuani was definitely something I was a little concerned about in draft. R1 Sejuani can be a little bit up and down, especially because you're giving away the Aatrox to Flandre, which, yes, Aatrox is beatable, but it's certainly a good pick. Kingen actually answers with Camille. Now, this is the staple Kingen pick. This is something that we have seen from him countless times, but honestly, he's never really looked all that good on it in the LCK. It's clearly his favorite pick, but I don't really think the production has been there to make it feel like super worthwhile, so it was definitely a little concerning to see that come out. But you grab the Azir for Zika, that's always going to be good. Yes, he's more of an assassin-oriented player, but Azir is so strong, and his positioning is so good in teamfights, it's usually going to be fine. He's been great on that champion throughout the year so far. And then you actually give Deft and Beryl a really, really intriguing bot lane that I want to see more of, the Kalista Ashe. This was something I was talking about all year long, both in the LCK where like teams actually started playing this duo, and in other regions where I wanted to see teams at least experiment with the duo, but Kalista Ashe actually gives you a lot of weird benefits, I would say, overall. Obviously, Kalista just gives you a little bit more pressure in the early game, but Ashe definitely compounds that. Kalista's biggest problem towards the back half of the game is that she usually just doesn't have the range and the attack speed to be able to burst you down before she can become a big target for the enemy team. Ashe actually really simplifies that problem. Not only do arrows make it a lot easier, but the slows that Ashe is actually able to generate really help out Kalista a lot. Obviously, Ashe is super good into Kalista as well because killing a Kalista's attack speed absolutely destroys her as a champion, but having her as a partner actually does a lot of benefits as well. And you know, I'm not going to say it, but having Beryl physically able to be ulted out of fights, huge dub, because sometimes he's just in the wrong place. And for Def to just be able to hit the R key and bring him back and say, no, 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 you're good right now, I think is super positive. And I think a lot of people forget, Beryl actually used to be an AD carry in Pro. He actually qualified for the LCK as an AD carry on Damwon with Hoyt in that bot lane. Beryl and Hoyt were the bot lane, so yes, he's a support now, but this is someone who has played AD carry professionally in the past, so I can definitely assume he at least knows how to play Ashe at a pretty decent level. So generally speaking, I like this DRX comp. My biggest flaw is Pyosik doesn't have a ton of agency and a ton of aggression, but that can be good sometimes. With Pyosik, you kind of want to wrangle him in, and Kingen might be a little bit of an issue. Playing Camille into Aatrox is certainly ballsy, but he's got to be able to win it. And also, Camille is really the only one that takes advantage of Sejuani passive really all that heavily. Zika can do it, but not all that consistently, so definitely some issues there. But for EDG, I actually think this comp is really weird. You're actually super low on damage, in my opinion. You've got the Lee Sin in the jungle that's trying to facilitate everything, but you draft the Varus, who, yes, can be super high damage, but just isn't consistently high damage, especially compared to Azir and potentially Camille, who are going to have a ball of a time getting on top of a Varus in the endgame. And then you've got a LeBlanc, who I've always talked about is a low damage mid lane assassin right now. Yes, she offers you security, she offers you consistency, and she offers you safety, things that are very valuable in the game, but in terms of all of the assassins that are viable in the meta right now, LeBlanc's damage output is just not there. She doesn't really have the ability to trade one-for-one with anybody in the game. Her burst is just simply not that right now, even with her ultimate up, and that's not even taking into account the fact that you probably need ultimate to be able to burst in the first place. And so, yeah, Scout on LeBlanc, not really the thing I would have went for. I don't like to pick all that much right now, but I can generally see the idea that they were trying to go for. You got the Aatrox in the top lane. These fights should go a really long time, and I think that does benefit Varus. I think that benefits LeBlanc, but more so, you should be able to win the early game. Yes, DRX has Kalista Ashe, which I do think is problematic, but Lee Sin should generally be able to set the tempo in this game because you're going into Sejuani Azir. They're not really going to have a ton of prio in the early to mid game. Lee Sin should be able to corral that in and create a lot of advantages. Unfortunately for EDG, Summer JJ decided to show up this game. I don't really know what to tell you. I covered the LPL all year long, and people will be surprised to hear that I was very low on JJ for a considerable amount of the year. Obviously, longtime viewers of the channel are not surprised at all to hear me say that. I was actually super, super pleased with EDG when they benched him this season and put Junjia in. But he comes back and he looked a lot better in playoffs, comes to Worlds, he looks good so far. This was Summer Split JJ. I mean, this was not good. This was maybe the worst game that he's played at the tournament. This was benchable, in my opinion. Not only was he consistently in the wrong spot, consistently getting out jungled, out macroed by Pyosik, who had a great game. I'll get to that in a minute, but he just made some really bad errors. I mean, these were consistent with the ones that he was making throughout the year in the LPL, where he would show up to a huge dragon fight without smite. It's like, okay. He would go into big objective fights down items and play like he wasn't. Like, just these mental lapses where I think he had way too much confidence in his ability to play the Lee Sin. Obviously, a few buffs to Lee Sin in terms of his durability in the back half of the game. Coming into Worlds patch, I think he just got a little bit over-aggressive in terms of his survivability. Most of the times he would go in, not get smite off because he didn't have it up, and then just die. Really not accomplish anything. He was a huge hindrance for this team. His early game impact was completely negligible. And in my opinion, he was the biggest reason why EDG was actually in a really disadvantageous spot in this game. It's really, really not heartening. Disheartening, I guess, would probably be the word, huh? To see JJ playing like this at a world stage, because he was so good in their World Championship run last year. You're really just hoping that he could turn it around. I want to give a ton of credit to Scout. Scout actually played this game really well on the LeBlanc, but there's, again, in my opinion, only so much that you can do on that champion to actually make a real impact on the game. Which is unfortunate, because Scout, generally speaking, over the course of the series so far, has probably been the most consistent member of EDG, and he's really going to need to step up if this team does want to continue moving on. But Let's talk about DRX. I actually really think they played this mid to late game incredibly well. Not only were they able to generate some early leads in situations that really weren't all that consistent. Obviously, Deft and Barrel were really good in the bot lane in this game. You got to give them credit for that. The double marksman bot lane can be super oppressive to play into, especially for someone like Varus who really just has no way to counter. He just kind of has to sit there and take it. And so that really worked out in the early game, but man, do you have to give some credit to Pyosik. He has really stepped up at this tournament. Talking about junglers that got benched, Pyosik also got benched right before Worlds in the qualifier that got DRX at this tournament in the first place. So to see Pyosik, really earn that starting spot back in play-ins where both him and Juhan did play, remember that, Pyosik really did earn his spot here on the team, and he really looked great in groups, and he's looked great in this best of 5 so far, in my opinion, and he gets player of the game here in game number 4. He has been awesome. For him to have this, really great performance on a champion like Sejuani, a champion that doesn't have a ton of impact early. Obviously he had a great game on Kindred the game before, but I've been questioning his pathing decisions, and this one it really felt like he had full control. I just gotta give him a ton of credit, really stepping up, and it's really good to see. Pyosik has all the talent in the world, and actually, I've said this all year long. I've said this the entire lifespan of this channel. If you go back 2 years or so, I'm sure I said this about Pyosik back then as well, but Pyosik has the potential to be the #1 jungler in the world. He really does. He absolutely does. He just doesn't play consistently enough, and he plays with his brain off way too often for him to be in that category. But there's no jungler in the world that Pyosik can't beat any game. I truly do believe that. And for him to step up so much here in this quarterfinals matchup against EDG, it has to feel super duper good for longtime fans like me of Pyosik and what he's able to do, because this is really him proving it on one of the biggest stages that he can be a focal point. He can be a franchise piece for a world's caliber LCK team. And that's just awesome. Obviously, Zika played really well in this Azir. The damage output he's able to get off on that champion is absurd. Azir is super broken right now. I would be super surprised to see either of these teams let that champion go into game 5, but yeah, Azir is really strong. Kingen on the Camille certainly had his moments. He was super important in this game, mostly because the ultimate is just phenomenal into their comp. He can just sit there and lock down the Varus, and what do they have to win team fights from that point onwards? He often died for it, but most of the time it was worth it. He was getting a little bit bullied in the early game, but sometimes you just got to make a few sacrifices in order to get to the top. But that was game 4. We're moving now on to game 5, and it's super huge. Obviously, the series should be over. DRX should be moving on to the semifinals up 3-1, but game 2 didn't quite go that way. So it is now up to these two teams to bunker down and come out in game number 5 and prove which one of them deserves to be facing off against Gen.G in the semifinals of Worlds. Is it DRX or is it EDG? Well, the winner of game number 5 was DRX. They are able to win game number 5, and they are able to take the quarterfinals series. Unbelievable, fantastic play from this team. First of all, let's just take in the accomplishment that this team has been able to achieve here. Not only has the organization DRX now reached the furthest that it has ever reached at an international tournament since forming, even kind of back in the day. We're talking about teams that have been really good. Obviously, the Dragon X teams were good before they shortened their name, but even Longzhu not making it out of the quarterfinals, even in their golden year, DRX is able to do that here, and incredible miracle, a Korean organization that was perennially average and was never even able to make the World Championship. So the organization of DRX really coming in clutch and showing up here at Worlds for the biggest time in their history, but even more so than that, and I say bigger than the organization because truly, this player is bigger than the org. Deft has finally conquered his demons. He has made it out of the quarterfinals for only the second time in his career, and the first time in, 7 years? After making the quarterfinals every single year, he's finally done it. He's emerged. He's broken the curse. It is over. He can finally make his way to the semifinals on his birthday, no less, and he played great in this series. Let's go ahead and talk about this game before I just get to rambling about how awesome this is for DRX, but really think both of these drafts are kind of weird. I think it makes a lot of sense on the side of EDG to go for what they went for. They were able to get Sejuani on B1, so they said, screw it. We're going to build around her. We're going to go for the Akali on Scout. We leave Zika the Silas, which is very bold. We'll see if that comes back to haunt them. Spoiler alert, it will. And then you grab the Jax to counter the Fiora. Now, Kingen going back to the Fiora, not great, but being countered with Jax, also pretty good for the Fiora. Like, this is a skill matchup, almost entirely, in my opinion. Yes, Jax does, generally speaking, have the advantage, but you can absolutely win this on Fiora. This is certainly not, like, unplayable for either of them. It is mostly going to come down to who is better. So you have a Sejuani base comp with some scaling in the bot lane for Viper, his best champion in Aphelios. And then for DRX, you're just going for this comfort feel. Deft on his best champion in the Ezreal, Barrel on the Karma to form this super poke lane that's going to try and dominate the Aphelios early, generate that lead and never look back. You've got Zeke on his best champion in Sylas. I wonder if he plays well. We'll still get to that. Kingen on Fiora, again, a really popular pick for him. And Pyosik on Viego, something he can be aggressive on both early and late in these teamfights. Really does fit his playstyle surprisingly well. So, how did the game work out? Well, let's just talk about DRX. I don't want to waste too much time. Scout goes for a dive early on in the game onto Zika, trying to get that solo kill. Both of them flash, Scout flashing under tower to try and pick him off, but he doesn't have the energy to be able to Q. I believe he's like 5 or so energy short, so he's not able to Q. Zika turns it around and is able to pick up the solo kill under tower, really spiraling the game for DRX, but Deft and Barrel are really developing pretty strong lead in the bot lane, although Viper is keeping up. He's doing relatively well. Pyosik is dominating the map. JJ, again, is getting run around in circles, which has just happened so consistently over the course of the last 3 games. Game 3, 4, and 5 were all Pyosik in the jungle. Super good. King and Fondre, they were fine in the top lane. King was doing a little bit more, but it wasn't really all that much. And then the show began. Now, it's going to be a little bit of a new thing to the channel, but I want you at home, yes you, listening to this video, to say it with me. If you watch the game, you'll know what I'm saying. Zika didn't kill Scout once. He did not kill Scout twice. He did not kill Scout 3 times. That man solo killed him 4 times on the world stage. That's the finals MVP from last year. Let's not forget, Scout was the world finals MVP last year, and he got solo killed 4 times on the international stage. My boy, Zika stepping up and showing the world how good he has been this whole time. I have planted my flag in his corner basically from day one, talking about how he has the potential to be one of the best mid laners in the world. Anybody who's followed this channel knows I have been a huge homer. I've been incredibly biased towards this player for so many years, and most specifically summer, because he was fantastic over the course of summer, and no one was talking about it. He didn't get any All-Pro votes. I didn't see anybody even putting him in the conversation. For me, he was the second best mid laner in the LCK this year. He dragged this team to the World Championships in the regional qualifier. He was the MVP of play-ins. He was the MVP of groups. And he comes out here in the quarterfinals and he solo kills the defending finals MVP 4 times. I mean, it is a superstar in the making here. And I'm so happy that everybody on the global stage finally gets to see it. I put out a tweet, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit flustered, but I put out a tweet when the games were going on. I did a little shameless self-promotion. Obviously, go follow me on Twitter. I tweet a lot during these games. I think you guys will really like it. But I tweeted out during the game, if only there was a YouTube channel that's been telling everybody how freaking good this guy has been. I know I'm bragging, but God, I'm just so happy for him, and that feeling remains. Yes, am I happy that I got the prediction right? Yeah, but honestly, it's not like I feel this ridiculous sense of accomplishment. I watched the games, and I saw the talent, and when you see him play, when you watch him do the things that he does, you just know that he is going to be a world superstar, and that is what he is slowly becoming here on this stage. He is turning into a megastar right before our eyes, and right before a contract extension, might I add, whether that be with DRX or a major LCK organization. It's going to be a really interesting offseason, but he's easily player of the game, and he continues to be the best player at the World Championships in 2022. That's a bold claim to make, but I'm going to make it. He has been the best player at the tournament. For EDG, this sucks. You've got to feel awful. You were up 2-0, and you got reverse swept at Worlds. This is only the second reverse sweep in the history of the World Championships. And unfortunately for EDG, it did not start with success. It's just not good. This is the defending world champions, and unfortunately, the quarterfinals is where they will get. I mean, in a grander scheme, I know I'm going to be a little bit, maybe a little bit too positive here, but in a grander scheme, this was a team that really wasn't looked at as one of the big four in the LPL at all this year. They were not, top esports. They were not JD Gaming. They were not RNG. They were not Victory 5. And so for them to make the World Championships is already a pretty big success. But for them to dominate their group and really be able to hold tight with a team like T1, even if they weren't able to beat them, really go toe-to-toe with a team like DRX at Worlds, this is a little bit of a success. Yes, I know running back the World Championship roster from the year before and only making quarterfinals isn't great, but metas change, players change. It's just what happens. And unfortunately for EDG, they just weren't as good this year. They had a myriad of problems that they really were able to fix over the course of playoffs in the LPL. But for them to be able to get out of groups and make quarterfinals over a team like Top Esports, I think you do have to consider that at least relatively a success for EDG. I know they would have wanted more. And Viper did play really well in this series. I don't want to diminish that. Scout played really well in every game except for game number 5, where, like I said, he got ran over by Zika, who Scout's out of the game, unfortunately. JJ did not play well in this series. Mako never really got a chance to be on those playmakers that he really thrived on in the group stage. Where was the Thresh? Where was the Nautilus? Where was the Blitzcrank? I want to see something that he can actively go out and try to make plays on. Hell, even the Leona or something like that I really would have liked to see, but they go for the safe play, the more Enchanter route. That's what everyone's leaning towards now. If only someone saw that coming, but yeah, definitely a lot of things for EDG to consider moving into the offseason, but Viper was great. Scout was actually really good in this series. There's just a lot of questions outside of that. JJ definitely atop of that list, but Flandre kind of on that list as well. But you've just got to be happy for DRX. Like I said, the farthest this organization has ever reached in League of Legends history. For them to be able to make the semifinals, yes, it's going to be a daunting challenge against Gen G, but if any team has the heart of Worlds on their side, right now it is absolutely DRX. Alright, well that is going to do it, not only for my DRX versus EDG quarterfinals overview, but for the quarterfinals overviews in general. All 4 series are wrapped up. We know our 4 semifinalists. In the semifinals, we're going to have JD Gaming taking on T1. We're going to have Gen G taking on DRX. I'm very, very excited to talk about those series in the upcoming days, but that's going to do it for today's video. Of course, let me know down in the comment section, what did you think of this series? Did you enjoy the DRX comeback? I mean, how could you not? How can anybody not cheer for this DRX team? I really am sorry to you EDG and LPL fans, but golly, the storyline, it's just there. DRX are so easy to root for this year, but of course, let me know how you guys felt about the series in general down in the comment section below. Of course, hit that like button if you did make it all the way to the end here. It probably means you enjoyed the content, so go ahead and hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to help the channel get out to a lot more people. I've been seeing a lot of influx of new people coming into these videos over the past few videos, so I really, really do appreciate you guys hitting that like button and making sure that this channel stays moving on. I hope you guys really do enjoy my analysis. And of course, if you are new here, if this is your first video of mine, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It really does not only mean a lot for the channel, but it's going to help you see a lot of this information a lot easier. Of course, I've got videos on all of the other quarterfinals matchups, every group stage, every play-in game. All that stuff is also on the channel, but we're going to be covering the semifinals and the world finals, as well as the offseason, which is coming up very, very soon, all on this channel. So if you are interested in that kind of stuff, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.